Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I kind of want to discuss this topic that a lot of people bring up of whenever you're critical of this whole current bodybuilding scene, modern bodybuilding, pro bodybuilding, and to some extent that even can start to include the physique guys now, and you say, hey, these guys don't look good, they look terrible, people actually jump up and say you're jealous. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And this isn't even just about me personally. This is kind of a general consensus. In fact, this is even a general consensus of people who were bodybuilders back in the 60s and 70s or fans of it back then. You find the majority of those people today say that modern bodybuilding, and this is going back at least a decade, that these guys look hideous. They look hideous. Every single one of them. Every single one of them, without fail, look hideous. I mean, people act like something like, they want to use the term aesthetics. You got this whole aesthetics thing that everyone talks about. I mean, objectively speaking, when you start talking even in terms of classic aesthetics, these guys aren't just bigger versions of that. They look genuinely hideous, and it's not my opinion. That is the general consensus of the majority of the population. If you were to ask the majority of the population, you would start interviewing random people and show them all these various guys at the Mr. Olympia and say, hey, these guys look good. You need to see the reactions you get. And that can even be from people who are in shape oftentimes, people who do exercise and who are fit. It's just objectively speaking, you're going to find that that's kind of going to be the case of it. That's not really a bizarre opinion to have. And so this idea that everyone who says that is jealous is just ridiculous. And the truth is, look at what's being presented up there. This whole thing came up yesterday with Phil Heath and the bubble gut. People are like, well, he still looks good. And I'm like, the guy actually has a gut while being in a single-digit body fat at contest time. He still has one. But he's not alone. Every single guy who was on the stage has one. And people say, no, it's just a thick abdominal. No, it's not just a thick abdominal wall. It's most likely large amounts of visceral fat that's indicative of some of the drugs they use and the diets and everything they use that is pushing their whole abdominal wall out. No, it doesn't look good. That's not just muscle growth that you're seeing. There's a lot more going on. And so they have these enormous waists, which again we know is just as bad for you as being obese, because you're dealing with all that internal fat, or even in some cases concerns of possible organ growth. And people are like, oh, well, he got it smaller this year, this guy did, but it's still enormous. It's ludicrous that these guys with these big bellies, that somehow, unless you like men with big bellies, there are chicks who dig guys with big bellies, there are some out there, but unless that's the context in which you're putting it, doesn't look good. It's certainly not aesthetic. And then you get into all the side enhancement. I mean, look at every single one of those guys up there. Anyone who's been around lifting and has been in the game can look at that and see that there is enormous amounts of fake muscle happening up there. Enormous amounts. Their arms, delts, everything. All that stuff is pumped full of oil, scar tissue, everything else. I mean, and that's scar tissue that accumulates over time from all those injections and stuff they do. But it's not just a little bit. It's a lot. People will kind of joke at all this stuff when they see out there these synthol freaks, but do you honestly think these guys up on this stage aren't also synthol freaks? I mean, do you guys honestly look at the top 5 guys who are at the Mr. Olympia and think that they don't have several inches of arm diameter added from stuff that they're just injecting directly into the muscle? I mean, be realistic. If you can't see it, then you don't really know what a muscle looks like. Then you don't know much about human anatomy. If you can't look at it and see what's going on there. There's just copious amounts of scar tissue buildup from all the stuff that they're pinning into their arms and their delts, and it's absolutely hideous. And you can't even talk about hard work there. I mean, how do you even discuss hard work or work ethic? People are like, well, they just work really hard to do that. You're telling me that part is hard work? You're telling me that the big guts is hard work? Or is that all stuff that they're putting into their body? If putting a substance into your body, or enormous amounts of a dozen substances, is hard work, I've got to really question what your definition of hard work is, because some of these guys don't train hard. Some of them do train really hard in the gym, but some of them don't. Does it take discipline to inject massive amounts of stuff directly into muscles? Yeah, it's painful. It's pretty painful to do that. So yeah, it takes discipline, but it's technically self-mutilation at that point. I mean, yeah, it's painful because you're inflicting trauma on your body that harms it and builds up scar tissue. It's not causing muscle growth. That takes discipline, but is that really what you're thinking of a discipline? So they have all this side enhancement. It makes them look bizarre and distorted. They have the big bellies, the big guts, and the massive waistlines from again, all the harm they've caused internally with other things they're doing to their body that's bad. You're telling me that that's hard work? And that's the other thing. How many people out there really think, when you look at most of these pro bodybuilders and you look at their routines and you watch them train, do you really think the majority of them are actually training harder than the average gym rat? Do you really think that they're all training harder? Or do you think that some of them are? Ronnie Coleman did. But a lot of these guys, they're not actually training that hard, realistically. You watch some of the training videos. I mean, they're not training that hard. They really aren't. Some of them are, a lot of them are not. Yet they're still competitive with each other. So what does that tell you about the hard work equation? That maybe it doesn't matter that much. Some of these guys are just genetic super responders to the drugs. They get lower side effects from the drugs, and it basically comes down to the drugs. That's the difference. That is the difference. The way that these people respond to substances they put in their body. You know, which again is largely a genetic trait. But how they're responding to these substances and the amounts of these substances they're using. That's what's defining the difference between these guys and a lot of the gym rats you're talking about. Because a lot of these gym rats who go to the gym 5-6 days a week are training just as hard as these guys and have 60-70 pounds less muscle. That's not what's going on. And you know, people don't even, seems like they don't even see the side enhancement. I had a guy in my comments in the middle of all this weekend jump in and say, well, what about C-Bum? And I'm like, I don't know who C-Bum is. And he gave me the guy's real name, and I think it was like Chris Bumstead, something like that. I actually went and Googled the guy. And he's like, he looks good. And I'm like, no, man, what's all that crap in his delts? It's the first thing. I pulled it up on Google to see who in the hell he was talking about. I'm like, well, maybe this guy's an exception to the rule. I've never heard of him before. I don't know who he is. And I'm looking at the mind-boggling amount of stuff that he has put into his delts. All right. Damn. You think it looks good when people put so much oil and inject so much garbage into their delts that they swell up like that, the way that his has, and people think that that's supposed to look, that looks good? So adding 3 inches to your deltoids by just with a syringe, that's your definition of what looks good all of a sudden? No, man, it looks disproportionate. It looks bizarre. It looks weird. And I mean, people, you can say that objectively. A person doesn't need to look good or even have an impressive physique or even work out. Right? A person who's never touched a weight in their life can still look at that, and they're going to see that and realize there's something wrong with that guy's shoulder. That is not what a deltoid muscle looks like. Okay? You'll be able to look at that and say that is not what a deltoid muscle looks like. That's just weird. So you have guys like that who have obviously done excessive amounts of side enhancement into certain muscles on their body that are very prominent muscles, and it makes it look weird and disproportionate and freakish and all of that. And then people are supposed to look at that and say, oh, well, that looks good. And there was someone who's saying they're not a fan of a lot of the pro bodybuilding because they don't look good, but this guy looks good. Are you telling me he doesn't look good and that's not a physique to strive for? Having massive synthol delts is what you think a physique you should strive towards? I mean, if that's really and truly what you think you should be striving towards, again, I've got to really question what you think is supposed to look good, or what you think anyone else walking down the street would think looks good. I just don't get it, man. I don't get it. And like I said, I'm not big into the whole bodybuilding thing, but I do understand the concept. It's not a foreign concept to me that people would want to look good. A lot of people would want to have an attractive physique. I get that. There's a lot of motivation for that in today's society. But being realistic about it, does anyone think that crap looks good? I mean, it's one thing to say, hey, I want to look good. Okay, fine. But if you think that you look like that, do you think that that's what looking good looks like? No. The dudes who have the beach bodies are who everyone thinks looks good. And most of the time that doesn't even require drugs, does it? Drugs can enhance that. But the physiques that the average person thinks looks good, if your body fat is low enough, you could probably reach inside of a year in the gym. I mean, just be realistic here. If you were to train really hard for 1 year, develop some proportionate muscle, and get lean, you know, within the confines of your genetics and structure, by most standards, most social standards, someone would say, hey, that guy's got a nice physique. They look good. Those guys on that stage do not. They don't meet that criteria. They don't look good. They don't. And it's not jealousy for people to say that. It's the truth. And only a little tiny fringe of people in this whole bodybuilding fanboy niche actually think that they do look good. All right, guys. So that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.